Before my father erased me from his will, he erased me from the dinner table. The roast chicken still steamed on its platter brushed with herbs my mother clipped from the yard that morning. A line of biscuits cooled in their basket brushed with butter that glistened beneath the kitchen light. The air smelled of lemon polish as though my mother believed shine could cover the cracks. Yet the room was never warm. It was orderly, heavy, and filled with voices that did not belong to me. I sat with my hands folded small compared to the width of the table. My brother sprawled across his chair with the easy confidence of someone who knew the world bent toward him. My father's attention followed him like a searchlight, every nod or grunt of approval sharp enough to cut. My mother moved quietly between us, pouring tea-setting spoons, trying to smooth the edges of the evening. John had scored 20 points in a basketball game that afternoon. He recited every basket as though the world had been holding its breath for each one. My father praised him between bites of chicken, laughing loudly enough that the glasses rattled in their stems. He clapped John's back and declared, "That's what winning looks like." I slid a folded test paper closer to the edge of my plate. A perfect score in geometry, something I had spent nights hunched over my desk to achieve. I imagined foolishly that my father might lift it with the same pride he lifted John's stat sheet. But he never looked. His attention was a beam that never shifted my way. My mother caught my eye as she reached to refill my water. Her fingers brushed my sleeve, deliberate and gentle. Her lips moved barely enough for the words to slip free, a secret between us. "One day, Anna, you'll have to stand for yourself." The words stung not because they were unkind, but because they told the truth. She could not shield me forever. John grinned, leaning back in his chair, telling a story about scouts and college coaches who saw him as the future. He described the roar of the crowd as if it were already history, as if he were already legendary. My father nodded along, pleased, proud, swelling with his son's borrowed glory. When my mother tried to mention my math score, her voice small but steady, my father silenced her with a raised hand. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His disapproval lived in the weight of his stare. "We don't waste time bragging about what doesn't matter," he said, his words cutting with the blunt force of certainty. The silence pressed against me. My fork slipped in my hand, and the sound of metal against porcelain made me flinch. My brother smirked, enjoying the spectacle. My mother's eyes flickered with apology, but she did not speak again. I understood even at 12 that my place at the table was conditional, not earned by effort or achievement, not carved by loyalty, but by how much noise I could make. My father leaned back, wiping his mouth with a cloth napkin, and looked across the table as though he were preaching. "In this house, value is measured by who speaks loudest, not who stays quiet." The words settled into me like stones, heavy and cold. I lowered my gaze to the chair beside me, empty, polished, untouched. My supposed place. My supposed proof that I belonged. I stared at it until my vision blurred, and I thought that seat was never mine. The day my mother died, I learned no one would stand between me and the storm anymore. Rain threaded the eaves and turned the cemetery path to dark velvet. Umbrellas bobbed. I stood by the casket and tried to memorize my mother's small hands wrapped around the rosary that had steadied our house when bills stacked and tempers rose. People said the usual things, and the words slid off my coat like water. Their hands squeezed my shoulders, then drifted away to find the next polite grief. Edward watched the grave like a foreman timing a poor eyes on cost not sorrow. John wore grief like a well-cut suit. From a distance, you'd swear it fit. When the priest finished, a cousin called for a family photo under the awning. I stepped into the cluster to be palmed one pace aside so an aunt could complete the line. "We need symmetry," someone said. The flash popped. Cold water pooled at my heels. The camera whined before it fired. The picture owned our history, and I wasn't in it. Back at the house, casseroles steamed and condolences hummed. I drifted down the hall to my mother's room, where the air still held her Sunday perfume. In the bottom dresser drawer taped under cedar lining, my fingers found an envelope with my name in her neat tilt. Inside lay a land deed and a worn bank card with both our names. No letter, just intention. I slid the envelope inside my dress close as a breath. When I returned, men from the company ringed the hearth like a boardroom. Edward took the head chair and spoke in measured phrases: continuity, responsibility, the future. His hand settled on John's shoulder like a crown. Someday, this will be his, he said, pitched to carry. Strong hands, a strong voice. Heads nodded in ripples. John kept a solemn mask, but triumph leaked. I waited for the room to thin. Then I stood before my father. "I'm enlisting," I said. "After graduation." He eyed the portrait, then me, measuring if I fit the frame. "Your mother is in the ground an hour," he said, "and this is your timing. You don't leave a family in mourning." "I'm not leaving," I answered. "I'm choosing a place where I count." John exhaled a laugh. "The Army needs honor roll handwriting now." I produced the recruiter's packet from my bag and held it out. Edward flipped through, smiled the way he smiled at subcontractors who dared to haggle, and tore the top page cleanly in two. Then another and another. Paper fell like snow. No man wants a wife with a gun. A spoon in the kitchen settled. The house found its silence. I knelt and gathered every torn strip. My hands were steady. My mother's whisper rose as if the air remembered, "One day, Anna, you'll have to stand for yourself." In her room, I packed a small duffel, 2 jeans, 3 shirts, the long-armed sweater she'd knitted. The envelope went into the inner pocket where zippers meet and secrets keep. I looked once at the rosary on her nightstand and left it a lighthouse for the house that remained. Rain softened to a hush when I stepped onto the porch. Through the window, my father outlined Monday to a supervisor, turning grief into schedule. I shouldered the bag and tied my laces twice, braiding calm into the knots. At the curb, I paused to choose the weather I would walk through. I placed the last torn corner of the form into my pocket, folded it until the edges aligned, and said what the street and the rain and the future needed to hear. If home won't have me, the Army will. The Army was the first place someone called me ma'am without laughing. The word carried no sarcasm, no edge, no trace of mockery. It came sharp and clean, barked by a drill sergeant who demanded precision and gave respect in equal measure. At 18, standing in formation with sweat stinging my eyes and blisters already burning through my boots, I realized how foreign it felt to be acknowledged without ridicule. The cadence thundered through the morning fog, every heel hitting dirt at the same time, every voice rising in chorus. For the first time in my life, my silence wasn't punishment, it was discipline. Training ground days were brutal. My hands cracked from rifle drills, my shoulders ached from packs that seemed to weigh more than I did, and my lungs burned from running until the world blurred. Yet none of it was heavier than the years of invisibility at home. Here, effort equaled recognition. If I shot straighter, if I carried farther, if I cleaned faster, people noticed. My drill sergeant's approval came in gruff nods, not smiles, but it was more than I'd ever received under my father's roof. I kept my mother's envelope hidden at the bottom of my duffel, tucked beneath spare socks and folded fatigues. I never opened it again. Just touching the edge of it was enough to remind me that someone once believed in me enough to leave me something that was mine. At night, when lights out silenced the barracks, I would run my fingertips along the crease, letting its presence anchor me. By the time we deployed to Iraq in 2011, I had carved out a name not through inheritance, but through sweat. Missions blurred into days of dust and heat, engines groaning across endless desert radios, crackling with static and tension. I earned a Bronze Star after a roadside ambush where training and instinct stitched together. We lost a convoy truck that day, but I pulled 2 men from the wreck before the flames swallowed it whole. I didn't hear my own name shouted, I only heard "Ma'am, she's got him" later, and realized they meant me. That night, I found myself in the cramped metal booth bolted into the corner of the base handset, sticky with desert grime, dialing a number that had lived in my head longer than I could remember. Each ring dragged. When the line clicked, I heard my father's breath heavy and impatient. I said his name. Silence stretched. Then the click of disconnection louder than the mortar fire we'd heard earlier. I tried again. This time, there was no answer at all. I wrote John once a short email with nothing but "still alive" and a photo of the desert sunset. Weeks passed. No reply. The inbox remained stubbornly empty. In time, I stopped checking except when duty required it. Family, I discovered, was what huddled in the back of the Humvee when the night turned cold, what passed canteens around, when the water ran low, what steadied your hand when a bandage slipped. It was in the grins passed between soldiers after a long patrol, in the quiet nods at mess when no one had the words left. These were the people who carried my weight without needing blood ties as permission. One night alone in the phone booth again, I pressed my forehead to the scratched plexiglass. My voice barely rose above the hum of generators. If blood won't claim me, then sweat and service will. The words misted, the glass disappeared, but they stayed in me like carved stone. The booth door creaked open. A duty officer stepped in, holding a folded slip of paper streaked with dust. "Carter," he said, voice clipped. "Message for you. Email from home." The paper trembled in my hand as the desert wind pressed against the walls. Justice doesn't always come with a gavel. Sometimes it arrives as two short sentences on a screen. July 2021, Kandahar. The storm came in low and mean, shouldering against the HESCO walls like it wanted inside. Sand hissed across the compound, turning the floodlights into smeared halos. In the barracks, the air tasted like dust and batteries. I sat cross-legged on my bunk with my laptop balanced on a crate rifle propped within reach helmet webbing, still biting a groove into my hair. The storm drummed on corrugated tin. Laughter rose from the far end of my squad, swapping stories, betting on the next mail drop, arguing over a bent deck of cards. Nobody knew I'd gone still. The subject line was nothing. No greeting, no sign-off, not even a misspelling to make it feel human. Just text bald and final. "Come home, serve your brother, or be erased." The cursor blinked after the period like a metronome for the end of a bloodline. For a moment, I only watched the words breathe in, the glow small and terrible like a snake coiled under a cot. My father's old warning uncoiled with it. "If you leave, you're no longer my daughter." He had thrown it at me years ago like a closing door. Distance hadn't dulled its edge. It had sharpened it. I glanced toward the doorway where boots and laughter gathered in a loose constellation, men and women who would stand between me and the storm without needing a reason. I thought of my mother's envelope still buried at the bottom of my duffel, a thin promise I hadn't opened. I thought of the chair that had never been mine. The email waited sure of itself. I could feel the old reflex rise, explain, bargain, fold, but the desert had burned that habit out of me. I set my fingers on the keys, typed a single digit, and hit send. 2. The decision arrived in my chest without ceremony. No drum roll, no grief, just a quiet settling like a rifle bolt sliding home. I closed the lid, stood and rejoined the voices by the door. Someone flicked a card toward me. Someone else asked if I wanted in. "Next hand," I said, and grabbed my kit. We had a patrol at Oro 200, storm or not. Night pressed in tight. The convoy rolled engines, muttering tires, shouldering through drifts of powder. The world reduced to green smear and grain in the NVGs. Radio chatter crackled and snapped. We moved like a single animal ribcage to ribcage. At the checkpoint, my team leader's hand found my shoulder, a quick squeeze I felt through plate and Kevlar. We were all silhouettes and breath. The blast came on the return leg, an ugly flower punched out of the road. Light, then sound, then a rain of small, hard things that used to be part of a truck. My training cut in before fear could secure scan shout, check tourniquets, drag cover count. When the dust cleared, we were missing one count. The medic stayed kneeling longer than the rest of us. The rest of us looked anywhere but at his hands. We carried our friend the way we carried ammo together. Back on base, the storm still scraped the walls. The chaplain stood with us in the loading bay, words blowing thin in the grit. Later, I helped write a letter that would travel farther than any of us careful spare sentences. The truth folded as gently as it could be. I held the tags in my palm until they warmed to my skin. In the quiet after when sleep wouldn't come, I sat on a stair under a buzzing light and let the storm rake my face with powder through the gaps. Real family carries your weight. They don't measure your worth with obedience. The thought landed and stayed heavy as a ruck, right as a compass. Near dawn, I returned to my bunk. The squad was finally asleep, mouths open, socks abandoned like fallen flags. I opened the laptop again. The message waited where I'd left it, smug in its brevity, confident in its leverage. I read it once more, not to understand it, but to memorize what I was walking away from. Then I hovered over the trash icon and did the only thing that felt like oxygen. I delete the email, erasing my father from my world as he erased me. When my plane touched down, I knew I wasn't coming home. I was walking into a different war zone. The jet rolled slow across the tarmac at Nashville brakes, sighing as if even metal felt weary. I pressed my palms against the armrests, though the cane the doctors had issued rested untouched in the overhead bin. The cabin air smelled of recycled coffee and cologne. Passengers leaned into phones, eager to announce arrivals. I said nothing. My whole body felt like it had already stepped outside into a heat I remembered but did not welcome. In the baggage claim, strangers reunited with squeals and lifted hugs. I slid my duffel off the belt and walked toward the rental counters, the weight familiar on my shoulder. 12 years of deployment had taught me to carry everything with me, even silence. By the time I drove out of the city, the skyline shrinking in the rear view, the road stretched empty, but not free. The closer the green signs read Franklin, the heavier the steering wheel became. The town hadn't changed. The gas station still sold sweet tea in foam cups. The high school still advertised its Friday game on a sun-faded banner. Yet everything carried a thin layer of neglect, like dust no one had bothered to sweep. When I turned onto our old street, I slowed, though part of me wanted to accelerate past it all. The white columns of the Carter house leaned like tired soldiers, paint peeling in strips. The shutters sagged. The yard was a patchwork of weeds. The name on the mailbox was still ours, but it looked ashamed to say so. At first, I thought the slump of fabric on the curb was trash left for pickup. But the figure shifted shoulders, twitching in the cool wind. Layers of mismatched coats clung to a body that seemed smaller than memory. A paper cup sat at his knee. His hands shook as though the bones had been replaced with twigs. I braked without thinking, the car idling across the street. It took too long for recognition to settle. My father, who once barked orders across boardrooms and dinner tables, sat hunched in the gutter of his own legacy. His eyes were vacant, their blue washed pale, scanning without seeing. Cars passed him with the same indifference I once knew at the dinner table. A neighbor jogged past without a nod. A dog barked, and no one claimed it. I reached into the trunk, pulled out the Army-issue blanket that still smelled faintly of diesel and sand, and walked across. My boots crunched on gravel. He did not lift his head. He only extended the cup, mechanical, as though survival had trained him to repeat motions without hope. I didn't drop money. I draped the blanket over his shoulders. The fabric settled, and he startled as if a ghost had touched him. His face lifted. For a second, I saw the man who once carried me on his shoulders when no one was looking, who once showed me how to patch a tire, even when my mother said grease wasn't for girls. But that flicker was swallowed by years of stone. His mouth trembled. His eyes narrowed as if trying to separate me from the storm cloud of memory. Then, hoarse and cracked, he spoke the word I had waited for more than a decade. Anna. It wasn't demand, wasn't command. It was a question fragile and lost. I did not answer. My silence was deliberate this time, not imposed. I turned boots grinding into the gravel and walked back across the street. My hand touched the car door and I breathed once before sliding behind the wheel. This time, the battle is mine to choose. Paper leaves shadows that greed can't erase. June 2023, Williamson County Chancery Court. The records room breathed dust. Fluorescents hummed like tired bees. I signed in and stepped to a counter guarded by a woman in a cardigan. The nameplate read, Helen Brooks. My mother's envelope lay at the bottom of my bag, unopened, the soft corner nudging my knuckles, reminding me I still had something mine. I'm here for Carter estate filings, I said. Her gaze weighed rules against kindness. She lowered her voice. You're the daughter they erased, aren't you? The word daughter cut and stitched in the same breath. I nodded. She slid a sheet toward me. Initial here. Keys clicked. When she returned, she set a canvas binder and 2 gray boxes on the counter. Powers of attorney amendments notices, she murmured. Your file has weight. Inside lay signatures marching in blue and black across thick paper. I scanned dates. Then the neat block sharpened durable power of attorney executed July 4, 2021. The notary seal was crisp, the pen stroke steady. Holiday, offices closed, in-town fireworks. 3 days after the ER admitted my father for a suspected stroke. The hospital's intake summary copied last week and folded in my bag listed benzodiazepines at 10:47 a.m. The notarization read 11:18. Helen followed my finger. Fast recovery, she said without smiling. She flipped tabs, deed, re-recorded trustee appointment, asset transfers landing like polite thank you notes. Do you see the cadence invoke the POA move? A piece. Acknowledge the move. Paper can waltz faster than a conscience. Can I copy these? We'll scan what we can, she said, feeding pages into a clattering machine. Check the state's notary index, too. When journals are clean, time leaves fingerprints. Fingerprints. In the Army, they confirmed identity. Here, they confirmed intent. I photographed each page. The shutter ticked a metronome against my ribs. Patterns surfaced, witnesses who drank with my brother. Acknowledgments signed minutes after signatures. A Delaware LLC where invoices went to hide. Helen smoothed one page with a paperweight. Holiday signings interest me, she said. Doors locked, yet documents appear on cue. She tipped her head. Who was in the room? I read the names. Strangers to me, friends to John, and imagined pens guided by men hungry for new power. I pictured my father's eyes glassy, nodding to questions he didn't hear. The copier coughed a last sheet. I stacked the printouts with palms that didn't shake. Helen watched, then spoke so softly I almost missed it. This isn't just inheritance theft, it's a crime. The words landed like a stamp. Not vengeance, just gravity. She slipped the set into a manila envelope and slid it across. Sign here. And be careful what you carry alone. I tucked the packet beside my mother's envelope and felt both weights at once, the patience she left me, the proof I had gathered. Behind me, a bell jingled. In front of me, the fan lifted a corner of an old calendar and let it fall. Light striped the counter like jail. Anything else of your father's? Helen asked. Enough, I said. I put cash in the tray. She pushed $2 back. Keep it. You'll need change somewhere that matters. Outside noon, heat hammered the courthouse steps. I hugged the envelope until the edges bit crescents into my skin and steadied my breath. Cars threaded the square. Life went on, indifferent to signatures and how a family can be moved between lines. I started down the steps, boots scuffing limestone worn by other verdicts. The file thumped against my ribs in a sober beat that felt like resolve. I did not look back at the door. Heat shimmered above asphalt. He thought silence buried me. Silence just kept me listening. In combat, you survive with a unit. At home, I thought I had none until one found me. The VFW Hall Cafe smelled like burned coffee and lemon cleaner. Flags lined the wall, their edges frayed from years of parades. A couple of old vets smacked dominoes with the finality of gavels. I sat where I could see the door, and not the street. Habit. A man in a charcoal sport coat approached with a gait that said he'd learned to ignore old pain. He tapped the table once like knocking on a hatch. "Michael Torres," he said. "Marine, then lawyer. You must be Anna." I nodded. We shook hands like people who understood that pressure could mean steadiness, not dominance. He set down a battered legal pad and a fountain pen polished from use. "Helen told me you had documents. You okay talking here?" "As okay as I get." I slid the manila envelope across. "He sent me an ultimatum when I was deployed. Come home, serve your brother, or be erased." Then he revised the will, and the POA followed. July 4th notarized while my father was sedated. Michael turned pages slowly the way you read after you've seen what speed can do. Holiday signings, Shell invoices, Delaware LLC. I've seen this choreography. He tapped the notary seal. "Tell me about the hospital timeline." I laid out the intake summary dosage times the nap of the sedative curve. His mouth tightened, not in surprise, but in recognition. "I've represented vets whose families tried to cut them out while they were in country," he said. "People mistake absence for permission. They forget paper can be an accomplice." A waitress slid 2 mugs our way. "Refills." Michael nodded thanks, then asked, "What do you want first, noise or leverage?" "Leverage," I said. Noise was John's religion. I don't want a fight he can frame. I want a fight he can't avoid. Michael wrote 3 words: demand, preserve, notice. We send a demand letter that outlines the anomalies and instructs them to preserve all documents, ledgers, emails, phones, notary journal. If they lose anything, a judge can assume it hurt them. We don't allege everything yet. We signal what we can prove. Then we wait for their reaction. Reaction will be anger dressed as certainty, I said. Good. Anger is sloppy. He scanned the room, lowered his voice. You're not the first daughter who came home to find her inheritance rerouted, but you might be the first who tracked the timing to the minute. I told him about the email in Kandahar, the taste of dust when I typed 2. The blanket I laid over a man who had once laid down sentences like laws. He listened without interrupting the way a squadmate listens when you're building a picture of a road. He flipped the pad and drafted date statutes, a list of records we expected to be preserved. His script was neat and strict, no wasted flourish. We'll send this certified and by email to his counsel, he said. We'll copy the title company and the bank. We're not loud. We're precise. The dominoes snapped behind us. Somewhere, a television murmured sports you could follow without watching. I breathed, let the room's ordinary noise steady my hands. Michael capped his pen and met my eyes. He thinks you're alone. That's his first mistake. He printed the letter on a portable printer from his briefcase. The paper slid out warm. He slid it to me with the pen. The names on the page looked like a map I finally understood. I wrote mine where the line told me to every stroke deliberate the way I'd learned to write coordinates under stress. Outside rain clicked in the gutters. Inside the air smelled of coffee and varnish. I steadied breathing, pacing for a march. I wasn't asking for permission. I was establishing contact and cover. Let's see how he reacts to hearing my name in ink. Houses don't change, people do. Sometimes enough to make you feel like a trespasser in your own childhood. I park 2 houses down and walk the rest past mailboxes that remember our name and hedges that don't. July heat wavers above the asphalt. The Carter mansion gleams like a polished tooth. Inside, the air smells of citrus and money. Old wood and family portraits are gone. In their place, glass chrome, a museum of upgrades. Laughter lifts from the back. I cross the threshold without being announced. A server in black glides past with canapes lined like metals. No one asks who I am. The den has been reborn as a gallery, white walls, a gas flame behind glass. John stands center, drink held high enough to be seen, suit the exact blue of a bank's logo. When he spots me, a smile unfurls, then tightens. "Anna?" he says, as if greeting a client late to a pitch. What a surprise. I look past him toward the mantel where our mother's photo once stood. A twisted steel ribbon sits there, now shiny and strangled midair. The empty chair at our dinner table flashes through me. I feel how I once kept balance by placing silence where a voice should be. Guests pivot. A woman taps a phone for notes. John's hand makes a slow tour. He names the Italian tile, the soundproofed theater, the wine behind fingerprinted glass. He doesn't name the deed that changed hands when our father's hands could barely hold a pen. "I didn't know you were in town," he says, steering me toward the terrace where the manicured lawn drops like a bluff. "You should have called." To whom I ask. "You never answer." His teeth show not a smile. "Busy, you know how it is." He tips his head toward the guests. "They're here because I build more than houses. I build confidence." "And paper," I say. "You build plenty of that." He leans in just enough to nick the air. "Careful. You always did confuse stubborn with smart." Then louder for the room my sister served. "We're very proud." Handful of murmurs rise. Someone claps once and stops. John patches the misstep with a laugh that sounds expensive. He guides me past a sculpture designed to be disliked. "Come," he says softly. "Let me show you what family looks like when it's done right." We walk a hallway of staged photographs, ribbon cuttings, ballrooms, handshakes, rented smiles. He gestures like a docent. "These people," he says, "matter." "Strangers," I answer. "Investors," he corrects. "Partners." His gaze drops to my boots' dust in the stitching. "You're still playing soldier?" How quaint. We stop at our mother's old room. It's a gym now, mirrors swallowing everything that tries to stay. "You renovated her life out of the house," I say. "I renovated failure," he replies. "We move forward here." He turns his wrist so light catches. "I almost didn't recognize you in that jacket." All that khaki turns a person into what his eyes audit my face like a ledger. "Oh, right. Just a ghost in uniform." The server reappears. I take nothing. I think of the records room, the notary's neat seal marching across July. I think of my father's name printed under decisions he could not have understood. John steps closer. The crowd thins. His voice folds into a hiss only I can hear. "Ghosts don't inherit. And you're already dead to us." I let his words pass through me like wind through a fence. In the army, I learned not to absorb shrapnel you don't have to. I look at the steel ribbon again and imagine it untwisting. "I came to see the house," I say. "Now I've seen it." He spreads his hands. "Then by all means, disappear." I walk back through the hallway of strangers, through the foyer that once held a basket of shoes and holds nothing that can be scuffed. Staff opens the door as if I requested weather. Evening light sits low and hard. The columns freshly painted still lean a fraction. I don't look back. Ghosts don't haunt. They hunt. When you corner a liar, the first thing he throws isn't truth, it's mud. I heard Michael's warning as I crossed the Franklin Courthouse lawn: expect retaliation, and expect it fast. The new filings rack held fresh paper like live rounds. My name stared back at me from the caption, "Defendant." John's countersuit dressed itself in concern and dripped with accusation. Combat had left me unstable. I was paranoid, vindictive, a threat to the family. He wanted damages, a gag order, a muzzle for the truth. A stapled press release grinned from the back page. Outside, Michael scanned the first sheet. "Planned for it," he said. "He'll lash out first." He's trying to define me before the evidence does. And failing if you keep your head. I kept it until the headline hit my phone like a thrown brick from hero to liability. A photo of John in a blue suit, a flag pin placed just so. The piece quoted sources close to the family and suggested that combat warps perspective. In paragraph 2, a phrase bloomed like a bruise, the bitter soldier. The article didn't ask me anything. It didn't need me to exist. It only needed my silence. The care facility called next. A polite voice trained to arrange bad news safely due to a dispute. Edward's support payments had been withdrawn. They were sorry. Protocol, not cruelty. The line clicked. The room seemed smaller for it. Back at the motel, I locked the door and spread the countersuit on the bedspread pattern to hide stains. I traced dates, thought of the records room and the 4th of July that signed what a sedative couldn't consent to. Comments kept populating under the story, seek help, sad unstable flies on a spilled drink. I put the phone face down and breathed until my pulse stopped trying to sprint without me. The TV in the next room laughed through the wall. An ice machine coughed. I read the sentence again, the bitter soldier. Tears stung, then found their own orders and stood down. The phrase didn't come from a doctor. It came from a PR team that learned to lace contempt with pity. It could bruise me, it could not classify me. I texted Michael the headline and the call about the payments. Document everything, he replied. We'll answer in court. Don't engage publicly. I didn't. I folded the countersuit back into its envelope like it was contaminated and watched the neon line under the blackout drapes fade from pink to nothing. If this was the valley of defeat, fine. Valleys are where you check your map and count your supplies. I sat very still until I could hear myself think again. You do not get to name me. I told the ceiling, the carpet, the pressed paper that tried to turn my service into a diagnosis. Then I opened my notebook and listed what we still owned. Dates, scans, the notary journal, the bank's wire trail. The list was shorter than anger and heavier than fear. 3 even knocks. I rose, crossed to the door, and looked through the peephole. Rain stitched the corridor light into a mist. Michael stood there, tie loosened, patient, steady, as if he were back on a line waiting for night to pass. He held up a small black drive between finger and thumb, rain blinking on its edges like a signal. He sent a smear and pulled a lever, he said. So we pull one back. He set his briefcase on the desk. Preservation notices went out. If anything goes missing, spoliation cuts his legs. And this, he lifted the drive, is the notary index and title emails. Timestamps don't love him. A siren turned a corner. He cut the facility payments, I said. I know, he answered. We'll fold the retaliation into the record. My duffel lay open, the blanket folded like a remembered order. They want me to flinch, I said. They want you to answer on their platform, he said. We won't. Michael arrives with a flash drive. I think we just found your way back in. Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a rifle, it's a timestamp. August 2023. Michael's law office smelled of warm toner and varnish. He slid the flash drive into his laptop. Rows and signatures marched across the screen. I steadied my palms on the table while dates snapped into formation. Notary Journal entry, 7:41, Edward Carter. Executed July 4, 2021, 11:18 a.m. Location private residence. Witnesses 2 names from John's cocktail circuit. A crisp seal, a neat flourish. In my bag, the hospital intake chart, benzodiazepines at 10:47 a.m. Observation through noon, cognition impaired. 2 clocks colliding in the minute hand. Michael tapped the glass with his pen. That right there, he said, is a fight the paper can't win. He opened Helen's scans, the POA, the deed, the trustee swap that moved our mother's land. Then the notary index journal amended 2 days later. Sloppy. Did you bring the medical records? I set them down. The EMR glowed hospital blue, intake meds vitals. He cross-checked times, then exhaled. It's not just unethical, it's provable. We built the complaint like a field dressing fast, clean, decisive. Parties' jurisdiction facts. Paragraphs like sandbags. We swore what the documents already said. Signature under sedation notarization on a holiday. Transfers to a shell. Michael drafted a motion for a preliminary injunction freeze assets, preserve records, stop the bleeding. Helen arrived with a banker's box. Certified copies, she said, placing the weight down. And my declaration. Her hands steadied on the lid. Don't tell me what happens next. Tell the judge. We walked to the courthouse. At the filing window, the clerk asked for originals, then copies, then the check ritual as shield. The scanner sang its thin mechanical song. The date wheel clicked. The rubber met paper with a small, irrevocable thud. Filed. AUG 2, 2023. Air returned to me. This is my first bullet fired. Back upstairs, Michael laid exhibits as if setting kit for inspection. The journal, the EMR, the deed our mother left like a quiet instruction. He slid me the preservation notice to John's counsel and the title company. From now on, he said, any missing email is a confession. We worked to dusk service packets, a witness list with 2 names for flipping a subpoena draft for wire logs. The printer rumbled like a distant convoy. I felt the old rhythm prepare. Check move, recheck. Only now, nobody used soldier to diminish me. They used plaintiff because I chose it. He scrolled to the notary's daily log. Gaps then, a rush of signatures. 3 instruments in 11 minutes, all tied to my father's file. People think paper will hide them, Michael said. They forget paper remembers. He checked the commission number on the state site. The renewal date dangled. My hand found my mother's envelope in my duffel. Its parcel number threaded through our pleading, giving me standing where my family had pulled the floorboards up. We added causes: carefully breach of fiduciary duty, conversion fraud. I wrote the timeline by hand: intake, sedative, notarization, transfer, then typed it so every minute aligned. At the filing window, the clerk checked staples and tabs, a medic for paper. He inked, pressed, stamped. Michael slid me the claim numbers. Memorize them. You'll see them again. Back in the office, we mapped next steps: courier service, a reach to a former accountant likely to flip, and a notice to the bank to preserve wire metadata. Footsteps approached fast. A door struck its stop. Leather cologne, a high-priced shoe's impatient scrape. Michael looked up, neutral. I turned. John's lawyer filled the doorway, tie blade, sharp eyes bright with anger made for TV and wrong for evidence. He held our stamped complaint like a contagious thing he had to carry without owning. You have no idea what storm you just started. Sometimes the stage your enemy builds becomes the platform for his own collapse. September in Nashville hums like a tuned string. The Omni Ballroom glows under crystal chill air scented with champagne. Carter Construction's 10-year banners climb the walls in a corporate blue that insists on trust. I pause at the threshold with Michael at my side, the 2 of us dressed like part of the decor and nothing like it. Behind us, the city's neon scratches at the windows. Ahead, a dais waits for a man who thinks a microphone is a crown. A hostess checks badges, then falters at mine. Michael smiles, neutral as a ledger. +1, he says. We move through the shimmer and click of glassware. Investors knot in small tribes. Journalists graze near the stage. Near the back, a man with my father's shoulders stands very still, hands folded around a water glass, as if the act deserves reverence. Edward doesn't see me, or he does, and chooses old habits, silence as shield. John arrives to applause that feels rented. His suit is the shade of a sky before a storm. He thanks donors, praises his team, fits legacy and vision into every third sentence. Slides bloom behind him, rooftops at golden hour, ribbon cuttings, graphs that never slope down. At the edge of the room, I hear the echo of his earlier hiss about ghosts and inheritance, and almost laugh. Ghosts, after all, understand lighting. Michael squeezes my elbow, our cue. He steps to the AV table and offers a flash drive to a technician who knows a check paid for his lanyard. The screen blinks. Well? John keeps talking, unaware the river behind him is about to change course. Wire transfer detail, Carter Construction operating. Northline Consulting, LLC, Delaware. Amounts that start small and learn to walk. Dates that drift toward holidays. Memo lines that read like jokes told late and badly. A murmur moves across the room. Journalists stop pretending to text. John's smile holds, then strains. He pivots to bluster. We believe in strategic partnerships, he declares, as though the word strategy could erase arithmetic. Michael advances the slide notary journal excerpts. A July 4th notarization stamped 11:18 a.m. The hospital EMR that documents a sedative at 10:47. A polite gasp beads along the chandeliers. John's eyes finally find me. He tries the old tone condescension wrapped in brotherly velvet. Anna, he says into the mic, this is a celebration. If you have concerns, we can schedule. We did, Michael says, voice calm. A demand letter. A preservation notice. Your counsel received both. I step forward because the room deserves plain language. I tell them what the paper already told us, that authority signed itself while consciousness was elsewhere. That a trust became a siphon. That holiday clocks can't notarize consent. I don't raise my voice. The slides do it for me. John laughs one beat too late. These are misunderstandings, he says. Clerical noise. Noise, I answer, doesn't leave fingerprints. He begins to walk toward me, mic low, smile thin. Up close, his cologne smells like citrus and fear. You don't know what you're unleashing, he hisses. You don't belong in this room. I look at him, then at the screen, then at the room, learning how to do math. You can buy the lights, John, but you can't buy the darkness rising behind them. For a second, the chandeliers seem brighter. A reporter launches a text. A donor whispers to a donor. Edward lowers his head and grips the glass so hard the water tips. John pivots to the crowd, but the crowd has learned a new language. Questions arrive not about vision, but vendors, not about growth, but governance. Someone asks about the Delaware address. Someone else asks about the notary whose journal skipped lunch on a federal holiday. John's answers unspool and tangle. Michael closes the laptop. We're done, he says softly. The rest is for court. I turn once toward the back. Edward looks at me for the first time in years. He does not nod. He does not shake his head. He only loosens his grip and sets the glass down as if ending a ritual. Gasps ripple as investors begin leaving. John's smile freezes. In war, justice is a bullet. In Tennessee, it's a red stamp and a judge's gavel. October 2023, Williamson County Chancery Court. Wood polish and copier heat braid the air. The press sits in the back row pretending not to record. I lay my exhibits out, Mother's Deed Hospital EMR notary journal prints from the flash drive each page, a gear that finally meshes. Call your first witness, the judge says. Helen Brooks, Michael answers. Helen swears in and takes the stand with the poise of a clerk who lives among dates. He walks her through the index, the July calendar, the state notary site. What drew your attention? He asks. The timing, she says. A notarization entered July 4, 2021 at 11:18 a.m., while hospital records show Mr. Carter sedated beginning 10:47 a.m. The journal appears amended later that week. She keeps her eyes on the bench, not on John. It lands harder that way. John's lawyer tries clerical delay, holiday lag. Helen replies. The state server stamps receipt in real time. Murmurs ripple. A camera phone clicks before the bailiff's frown stops it. Michael calls Evan Rush, the ex-Carter accountant, thin, careful, ashamed of numbers that learn to lie. Under oath, he opens a binder and points to payments, fake consulting invoices to a Delaware LLC, broken into sub-threshold chunks. Reimbursements for site visits that never occurred. Wires timed for holiday weekends. He turns a page. An email from John Push this before the 4th. Nobody's watching. The room inhales. Cross comes with teeth. Disgruntled John's counsel suggests. Rush produces his resignation letter dated months before the suit citing ethical concerns. The judge reads returns it expression unreadable, but finished. Michael touches the screen. EMR entries appear beside the notary line. Dose vitals observation 10:47 11:02 11:30. Then the seal 11:18. Can a person under active sedation validly execute a POA, he asks. Not in my experience, Helen answers from the second row, permitted for foundation. John can't stand the slope. He leans past his lawyer and snaps, I approve every outgoing. It's called leadership. Michael doesn't smile. Every outgoing, including July 4th at 11:22 a.m. Our controller signs holidays. John fires back too fast. Michael lifts a transcript. Your deposition page, 43 line 9. I personally sign all payments above $5,000 without exception. Objection. Overruled. The sound that follows isn't triumph. It's gravity settling into place. The judge asks only one thing. Mr. Carter, where were you at 11:18 a.m.? On July 4th, 2021, at my father's, John says, with witnesses. Michael raises the notary roster 2 cocktail friends later paid through the shell, and a photo pulled from one friend's public feed, time-stamped at a lake an hour away. If paper remembers phones, gossip. The gavel taps once. That's enough, the judge says. He leans back then forward as if moving weight from one hand to the other. On plaintiff's motion for preliminary injunction granted. The record shows a strong likelihood of success and a risk of irreparable harm. All assets under respondent's control are frozen. The clerk will transmit the file to the district attorney for review of potential criminal charges. The clerk stamps, the red square blooms. In the back row, a reporter exhales like prayer. I feel air move through places the desert stiffened. Beside the aisle, Edward holds a program in both hands as if it might shatter. He looks at the seal, not at me, and something in his posture loosens. Counsel tables rattle with papers being gathered. Rush lowers his head for a count of 1, then sits straighter. Helen disappears into the corridor with the economy of a person who has a line to run. Michael caps his pen and whispers, "We hold. Let the orders work." John stands alone. The smile he wore at the gala has nowhere to live in this room. He pivots slowly until his eyes find me, and now there is only heat. No strategy. The gallery stills. The gavel rests. The clerk writes. Finality has a sound. Today, it sounds like ink. Outside, October sun slices dust motes into banners of light. John turns to me, eyes blazing. You killed this family. Anna Edward lowers his head in silence. When the man who once erased you whispers, I'm sorry. It's not victory. It's release. October folds itself around the cabin. The fire ticks and breathes. Red court stamps glow on the table like embers. Edward sits with his elbows drawn in fingers near the packet as if the paper could bite. He reaches stops and finally pushes the top page a fraction, as though truth might spill. He clears his throat. Your lawyer spoke plain, he says. The judge, too. He stares at the timings. I wanted the ink to be smarter than the clock. I set water to heat. Silence used to be a cage. Tonight it's a cup I hold for him. I taught that house a rule, he says. Value is measured by who speaks loudest. The sentence hurts him. I mistook volume for virtue. Your brother learned to be heard. You learned to disappear. Then I applauded. He lifts the page of transfers. I knew John cut corners. I called it ambition. He brought papers. I didn't read. I performed being needed. It felt like being good. The kettle whispers. I keep it off boil. After your mother died, there was a hole and I stuffed it with control, he says. I made rules to hold the roof and swung them like a hammer. When you enlisted, I called it defiance because calling it courage would have demanded courage from me. He rubs the red stamp. John told me you were unstable. Said war bent you. Said you'd burn the company. I believed him because belief let me stay in charge without standing in a mirror. You chose him, I say. I chose the easier noise, he answers. And when noise turned to fraud, I looked away. Wind lifts the porch boards. I pour tea. He cups it and doesn't drink. When you were small, you solved things by listening, he says. I mistook gentleness for weakness. You brought me a perfect test. I pretended the page was blank. I gave him the truck keys. I gave you bus fare. I remember. The distance grew, he says. When I finally spoke into it, I sent a threat. Come home, serve your brother, or be erased. I thought obedience would fix what I broke. Obedience is a poor glue. Firelight climbs, falls. The apology gathers. He sets both palms flat as if surrendering something sharp. I chose control over love, he says. I chose it when your mother was sick when you left, when John smiled with other people's money in his eyes. He meets my gaze. I taught you submission instead of love. For that, I beg your forgiveness. I study the slack corners of his mouth, the pride still wringing his spine. The boy taught that volume makes rooms obey. Pity edges against anger cooled to shape. The past will not be repaired, but it can be named and carried. I'm not a priest, I say. A gavel doesn't manufacture remorse. Still you are here. You are speaking in a voice that isn't loud. He nods. I can't give back what I took, he says. But I can carry what I can carry. Tell me where. Start with truth when it's asked, I say. Start with tending something small. My mother's envelope waits in the drawer. I think of the bare strip of earth behind the cabin where morning finds us first. We sit with cooling metal and the soft grammar of flame. A fox cries, then stops. An inch inside me loosens. The room tilts from defense toward repair. No bridge, not yet, but a plank laid across cold water. He glances at the packet and leaves it alone. I wanted my name to mean shelter, he says. I made my silence mean danger. He steadies the cup. If there's a garden, I'll dig. If there's testimony, I'll speak. Outside leaves scrape the steps, then settle like pages turned aside. I set tea before him, reply. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. But it opens tomorrow. Some verdicts don't need words. They echo in the silence when no one listens anymore. Carter Construction HQ stands behind glass that once reflected ambition. Now the lobby is dark doors, cross-braced, a taped notice. Access suspended pending board action. A janitor buffs circles that will never shine. A receptionist boxes a mission statement. Bubble wrap sighs. A guard scans a badge that used to open everything. The reader blinks red. I park across the street and watch. Endings are easier to count from a distance. Employees exit in pairs, cardboard under chins, shoulders curled against what they won't say. Eyes slide past the sign where John's name once sat beside CEO. Ghosted adhesive still catches light. Phones vibrate quit. Unanswered calls pile up. A board member slips through a side door and leaves quickly, head down. A courier brings envelopes thick as concrete samples. Service of process wears khaki. The guard signs. No one claps. Enough. Down the block, the diner TVs run with captions. The lower third says, "The fraud, air." B-roll John at ribbon cuttings under chandeliers in a suit of applause. Then a still of our filings, the red stamp like a wound that refuses makeup. Investors vanish like schoolfish, one twitch and the shape is gone. A banker who used to clap his shoulder keeps his door half closed. In a donor club window, staff lift a placard off a seating chart with practiced gentleness. I think of his boast, I am the voice of this family. He's about to learn what a voice sounds like in a room that has lost interest. His condo is glass and echo. I stand on the sidewalk below. Inside, lights glare. He moves room to room on the phone, pacing the way you do when no call will save you. The concierge keeps distance. The doorman studies mailboxes when he passes. Fragments drift from the balcony. Temporary review council advises words he once used to make uncertainty behave. A neighbor passes in the hall, eyes down, mail clutched like a passport. No one asks where he's headed next. Silence grows clever, finds corners. The board vote arrives in an email he opens at the window. I can't see the text, but I see the color leave his face. He dials. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. A third time. Nothing but breath. He pulls a cabinet handle like it owes him a secret, then lets it swing. He stares at a framed groundbreaking and turns it face down. On the table, glossy profiles with his grin sit under a pizza box. He palms the top magazine, hesitates, drops it. From the street, I watch his reflection in the glass, a man interrogated by himself. His jaw works. Words build pressure with no door to leave. He opens the balcony again, leans into the air, and chooses volume over sense. I am still a Carter, he shouts. The room refuses to endorse it. The statement hits glass and returns thinner, an echo sawn down by empty space. No answering call rises from the street. The concierge studies a clipboard. A neighbor waters a plant without looking up. The city goes on with its mercy of indifference. He shouts again and hears less. He drops into a chair and surrenders to a posture that forgets presentation. The chandelier refracts nothing but itself. The TV on mute shows his name. The crawl says assets frozen, investigation referred. He reaches for the remote, can't find it, stops searching. I stand long enough to know the shape of the moment will hold. Then I turn away, because a man learning silence doesn't need witnesses once he has heard it. Night smells like rain that hasn't decided. Tires whisper. A light changes. Someone on a porch laughs into a phone that answers back. I whisper to myself, for a man who worshipped his voice, silence is the harshest sentence. I once thought justice meant a verdict. Today, justice feels like standing tall without shame. November wind braids itself through Franklin's town square. Flags snap along the edges of the courthouse lawn, red and white, cutting against the gray sky. Folding chairs line the brick walk, everyone filled, some by children with paper poppies pinned to coats, some by men in caps embroidered with campaigns from decades past. A brass band warms its instruments with soft scales. The mayor fidgets at a podium. My bronze star is a cool weight on my collar, less metal than reminder. When they call my name, I stand. The cane I don't use leans against my seat. Eyes follow me up the steps, curious, reverent, and a few surprised. I grip the podium not because I need to, but because it anchors me to this ground I once thought had no place for me. I was told once that value is measured by who speaks loudest. I begin. But service taught me the opposite. You measure it by who carries weight when no one is looking. I look over the crowd. Michael stands near the back, arms folded, expression steady. Helen clutches a small flag, pride plain in her face. And behind them, in a row meant for townsfolk, Edward sits alone, head bent forward, hands clasped. My mother wrote me a note once, I say. She told me that one day I would have to stand for myself. That day is today. Because family is not the name on a deed or a signature on a line. Family is who carries your weight, who covers you when the blast comes, who doesn't demand obedience as proof of love. The square is hushed. The sound of flags fills the pause. I let it stretch until it feels like part of the speech. If you must choose between dignity and acceptance, I continue, choose dignity. Acceptance fades. Dignity remains. Justice may come late, but it comes. The words leave me lighter. For a moment there is no applause, only quiet, the silence of recognition rather than rejection. Then one person rises. Another follows. Soon the square stands, not roaring but clapping in rhythm, a respectful tide that doesn't drown the message. I meet Edward's eyes across the chairs. He wipes at them with the back of his hand. For once, he doesn't look away. I step down from the podium, shaking hands, nodding at the few who whisper thanks. Michael squeezes my shoulder in passing. Helen presses the flag into my palm. The band resumes a hymn that drifts over the rooftops. That evening, back at the cabin, Edward and I kneel in the dirt together. The ground is cool, resistant, but gives under our joined effort. Between us, we lower a sapling, its roots wrapped, eager for space. We cover it gently, patting earth into place, the smell of soil rising like memory. He doesn't speak, and I don't need him to. I think this is my inheritance roots. I chose not ones forced on me. I stood through storms that were meant to silence me, yet here I am speaking to you without shame. If my journey resonates with you, I ask you to stand with me now, not out of pity, but out of recognition. Share your thoughts, tell me what you see in my fight, and let me know if my path mirrors moments in your own. To anyone listening, choose dignity over acceptance when the two collide. Families, workplaces, communities, they may try to measure your worth with obedience. But real worth comes from carrying your truth even if you must carry it alone.